Greetings and salutations. I'm Sky, and welcome to my little gouache demo. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I use gouache, and of course, why I use gouache. There's always a why. I like to use gouache to bring out highlights, deepen shadows, and bring life to dull colors. I'll tell you why I use gouache instead of more watercolor layers or colored pencils later. I almost always start with the shadows of my work, since that's where I need to do the most work. After that, I'll move on to adding more saturation to colors, and then, at the very end, I'll add my highlights. I like to work like this because I find that adding shadows to the image adds context to the other colors. If I go in with my highlights first, I'll usually wash out the image. I find that gouache is really similar to watercolor. It's translucent, so you can see all the layers underneath it. You can also see the paper coming through, which gives it that signature glowy look. That does mean that you have to be careful of lifting the other layers underneath it though. So I like to start with thin layers that look pretty similar to watercolor and gradually build my way up to thicker layers later. If you want to make your gouache blend into your watercolors as much as possible, I recommend getting a higher quality gouache so you can use thinner layers. That's what I do. By using thinner layers, you still preserve the glowy look of the watercolor, but you get more coverage. If you use thicker layers, kill that a little bit, and that's okay, but I find if I use too much gouache it ruins the piece. Something else I like to do for clean washes is wet my paper. I keep a spray bottle on hand for misting the page, but you could also use your brush. I usually skip this step for finer details, since I find that if I mist the page before, the details can bleed and feather out. And that's not usually the look I'm going for, but sometimes it works. I think my best secret, though, is probably wetting my brushes before I use them. I keep an extra fluffy brush on hand, the brown one, for blending, and this one's always mildly moist. In fact, I think I just wet everything. Yeah, go ahead, wet everything. That's exactly what you want to do. Alright, now on to the reasons why I use gouache. And before that, you know the usual patter. Please like, subscribe, comment, blah blah blah. But seriously, comment and tell me what you want to see next. That helps me out. So, why do I use gouache? Why don't I just use more layers of watercolor? Why don't I use pencils? Well, I can tell you, I've tried both of these approaches before, and neither of them really work for what I'm trying to do. The watercolor, for instance, seems like a good idea, but as soon as you start layering too many layers and making the layers too thick, you get really splotchy, uneven results, and you lift the colors underneath it. No bueno. And colored pencils, yeah. They work pretty well for that, but I find that if I layer colored pencils, you kind of have to press hard so you get that nice, creamy look. And that's bad for my wrist, and it also kills the glowy look of the watercolors. One other reason I don't use pencils is because of how shiny they are when you try to photograph them. It just doesn't look good if you ask me. I still use pencils for detail work though. Don't get me wrong, they're very useful for select purposes. So, by using gouache, I can avoid the shiny look, since gouache is matte. I can avoid the lifting problem with watercolors, since I can get a lot more coverage with gouache. And, unlike acrylic paint, I can layer colored pencils on top of them, since it still has texture to it. Alrighty, so now you know why I use gouache, and some of my best tips. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.